Hello! This full stack of ash boards came from just two Rolocs. Today I'm going to show you how I milled them using the new VEVOR 62cc chainsaw together with the VEVOR Alaskan Sawmill. I will also share my honest thoughts on how this setup performed during the process. And if you would like to check out the tools I used, I've added the links in the description below. So let's get started.
Before we get started, you'll find links to the chainsaw and the Alaskan sawmill in the description below, along with discount codes if you'd like to check them out. Now, taking a closer look at the chainsaw itself, I started by unboxing it and checking the overall build quality. At first glance, everything felt solid and well put together, especially considering this is a budget setup. Assembly was straightforward. I installed the guide bar, fitted the chain, and made sure everything was properly aligned and tensioned. Before starting, I carefully checked all the essential details: chain tension, fuel, and especially the oil system, which is critical for milling. Before mounting the saw onto the Alaskan mill, I have to admit I was a bit skeptical. This is a 62cc chainsaw with around 3.8 horsepower, and I'll be pushing it through solid ash, which is a hard and demanding wood. Under this kind of load, milling puts a lot of stress on both the engine and the entire setup. Normally, for this type of work, I would expect to use a professional chainsaw from brands like Stihl or Husqvarna, which would typically cost around €1,000 or more. So I was really curious to see if this more affordable setup could actually handle the same kind of pressure. There was only one way to find out. While mounting the chainsaw onto the Alaskan mill, proper setup is really important for smooth operation. One key detail is the position of the end bracket on the guide bar. It should never be placed over the tip of the bar where the nose sprocket is located, because that part needs to rotate freely. If it's blocked, the chain won't move properly, which can cause unnecessary stress on the saw and affect the cut. Taking a moment to set everything up correctly makes a big difference once you start milling. This was the moment of truth. With everything set up, I started the first cut into the ash log. To be honest, I wasn't completely sure this setup would handle what I had planned. The goal was to turn this log into boards that are about 3 centimeters thick and around 27 centimeters wide, which is quite demanding, especially for chainsaw milling. Ash is a hard and dense wood, and these long continuous cuts put constant pressure on both the engine and the chain. Right from the start, I focused on keeping the movement steady and controlled, letting the saw do the work instead of forcing it forward. You can immediately feel how much resistance there is when cutting along the grain like this. It's a completely different experience compared to cross-cutting, where the saw moves much more freely. At this point, I was still trying to find the right pace. Too much pressure and the engine starts to struggle. Too little and the process becomes slow and inefficient. So it becomes a balance between patience and control. And I'm curious, have you ever tried chainsaw milling yourself, or is this something you're thinking about getting into? As the cut continued, I started paying closer attention to the sound of the engine. You can actually hear when the saw is under load, and that sound becomes a good indicator for how hard you can push it. Keeping a consistent rhythm made a noticeable difference. The smoother the movement, the cleaner the result. With each pass, the board started to take shape and the grain of the ash began to reveal itself. There's something very satisfying about seeing raw material slowly transform into something usable. Even though this was my first time doing chainsaw milling, the process quickly started to feel more natural. At the same time, I realized just how important the chain setup really is. Before starting, I sharpened the chain to a 10-degree angle specifically for ripping cuts. And compared to a standard 30-degree chain, the difference was clearly visible in both the cut quality and how smoothly the saw moved through the wood. The surface finish was cleaner, and the overall resistance felt lower. That small adjustment made a big impact on the entire process. As I continued milling, I kept checking the chain tension and making sure everything stayed properly aligned. Long cuts like this require attention to detail. There's no rushing it if you want consistent results. At this stage, I was still slightly skeptical. A 62cc chainsaw with around 3.8 horsepower is not typically what you would choose for heavy milling like this. Normally, this kind of work would be done with a much more powerful professional saw. But the more I progressed, the more confident I became. The saw kept running steadily and it handled the load better than I expected. The cuts remained consistent and the boards started stacking up one by one. And this is where things started to get really interesting. What began as a test slowly turned into a real result. And I'd like to ask you, do you think a setup like this can really replace a more expensive professional chainsaw for projects like this? Because at this point, it was already starting to prove something. The grain of the ash looked clean and even, and the boards were coming out very close to the dimensions I had planned. Around 3 centimeters thick and wide enough to be used for my final project. By now, the process felt much more controlled. The initial uncertainty was slowly disappearing. Instead of wondering if it would work, I started focusing on how well I could make it work. Each pass became more consistent and the results kept improving. With the main cuts completed, the log had been fully transformed into usable boards. Exactly what I had in mind from the beginning. From 2 raw ash logs to a full stack of lumber. After everything, I wanted to check one more thing. Even after all that continuous load, the chainsaw still started smoothly without any issues, which is always a good sign after this kind of work. And in the end, these boards became exactly what I had planned. 2 raised garden beds, built entirely from the same ash logs you saw at the start of the video. And honestly, I didn't expect this setup to perform this well, but it proved me wrong. Total, I milled 3 ash logs, each about 2 meters and 10 centimeters long and roughly 40 centimeters wide. I started by flattening 3 sides of each log to create a stable reference for the cuts that followed. From those 3 logs, I ended up with 20 boards, each about 2 meters and 10 centimeters long, 27 centimeters wide, and around 3 centimeters thick. In total, that means the chainsaw went through 29 full milling cuts. Along the way, there were also 9 offcuts, which I'll definitely put to good use. Some of them will be perfect for future bolt projects, and the rest will be used as the base layer for the raised garden beds, so nothing really goes to waste. Looking back at the entire process, I'm honestly impressed that this setup handled that amount of work. From raw logs to finished boards and finally into a real project, it all came together better than I expected. After everything was done, I wanted to see how the saw would start after all that work. Even after cutting through multiple logs and completing all those milling passes, it still starts without any hesitation. The engine runs smooth, steady, and exactly as it should, which is honestly a very good sign after putting it under this kind of load. And for a setup I wasn't completely sure about at the beginning, that's a solid result. And this is the final result. Using the boards milled from those ash logs, I built these two raised garden beds. Each piece was cut, positioned, and assembled to create a solid and functional structure. What started as raw logs is now a finished project, ready to be used. It's always satisfying to see the full process come together like this, from milling the wood all the way to building something practical. And knowing exactly where the material came from makes it even more special.
Overall, I'm honestly impressed with how this setup handled the job and turned two ash logs into usable boards. The only issue I had during the first test was chain oiling. It wasn't delivering enough oil to the chain at first. After taking everything apart and cleaning it, I fixed the problem and now it oils normally again. So it was most likely just blocked or possibly not assembled correctly from the factory. I also sharpened the chain to the 10-degree angle for reaping, and you can clearly see in the footage how much smoother it cuts compared to the standard chain that was sharpened at 30 degrees. That difference in chain setup made a noticeable improvement during milling. Now that everything is working properly, I'm looking forward to testing the setup again on the future projects. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.